The sheep for us are a no-brainer. We never really think about it. It doesn't matter how much they cost. They always come out on top, and we always think they're worth doing.
If you start a sheep flock, you may not see the real return on that for a few years. It could be up to 5 years. Mm-hmm. But once you get to that point, if you've got a 10-year or longer sort of vision or goal with it, you will see it. At a small scale, I mean, historically sheep were pretty important because small doers could do it, mm-hmm. to put it very bluntly.
So this video really is going to be a breakdown of costs. And one thing that you'll discover is we kept really, really good records for 2 years, and then we let it slip. And that's something that we have found is so important.
I'm going to say right up front, to some this is going to be a boring video. We're going to talk about numbers, we're going to talk about things that maybe aren't super glamorous, but we think they're important, and hopefully it gives you some really good information and some food for thought and thought for food.
So we're going to look at and analyze those first 2 years with the sheep, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about this year in particular and some of the changes that we made and the results that we have discovered so far.
This is a look at sort of our expenses, annual expenses, so feed, that sort of thing.
For 2020.
For 2020. We kind of came into this year with a low number of bred ewes. We only brought 4 bred ewes with us, so...
And only 3 had babies.
Well, only 3 of them actually had young, and we did float a larger number of younger sheep because we tend to breed them so they're having their first kids in their second year just because of size. That's just something that we do as a management system to avoid problems. Not saying that you can't do it other ways. But that's kind of where we come at after the move. So it really wasn't a great year for the performance of the sheep. We didn't get a lot back from them. No. We did butcher 2 so far, and we actually did
butcher 2 in 2020.
2 in 2020. Now the other part that's hard with the sheep is sometimes some of the economics takes more than 1 year. Which is kind of a theme with a lot of these big animals. And we do have some of that original flock that are going to be butchered before next spring. So, yeah, anyways.
Yeah, but it's still working in that year.
It's still not on the...
in a yearly economic, in a yearly economic, we spent on the sheep $2,126.78. They're a little bit lower than the horses and the goats/cows because... They're housed outdoors. They don't go through the shavings because this mm-hmm. includes bedding in the barn and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And they basically brought us in. We put 68 pounds of lamb into the freezer for the 2020 year.
Now, the downside of that is we also had a butcher cost of $216.96 yes. because we did get them done properly, because at one point we were really thinking of
selling meat.
Not in a commercial way, but having the ability to sell some meat.
That's gone a little bit.
We've changed our trajectory on that a little bit. I guess in the grand scheme of things, that's not a lot of money for the number of animals. But
well, and there's the theory too, because we came into it, this would be the similar idea as the chicken economics. We came into the year as we had just moved. We downsized our flock to, like Chris said, we only had the 4 breeding ewes, and we floated some younger animals to build our flock back up, which then in turn makes 2021 an amazing year because we have 9 ewes that we've bred. Which means instead of getting the 5 or 6 lambs, did we get 6 lambs last year? 5 lambs last year. You know, we're anticipating probably 15 lambs, which, hopefully. You know, hopefully, obviously you still got to feed those animals.
Yeah, you still have a feed cost,
but you have more to work with, which makes potential for live sales, which we said in the chicken economics is something that really is important to bring your costs down, is some live sales and having a bit more for the butcher.
So the real take-home message here is, with the sheep in particular, there is a potential to help them cover their costs. That's kind of, I would say, relatively obvious. But it doesn't work out perfectly every single year. And so you kind of have to, when you're not doing this as a put and take, i.e. you're keeping breeding stock, you have to look at this a little bit more on a longer term goal. It's not terrible, and we definitely can see where this will improve next year.
Yeah, the sheep is one livestock that we keep that we're really hoping to get going in the right direction quite quickly.
With the move, you had a setback that we're now compensating for, so, or correcting for. So when we moved to this property in 2019, we brought everything with us, and we brought a lot with us. We brought our flock of sheep, which we'd already established in another location. We also brought an entire herd of goats, which you'll find out in the next little segment, left the homestead in that 2020 year. But once we got here, we also had some delusions of grandeur of what we could do on a larger property. So although this is a sheep channel and this is a sheep video and we're talking about the cost of raising sheep and that breakdown and sort of, I guess, the history of where we were and where we are now, an important piece that actually fits into this puzzle is cows. We know the cost was $2,185.78. We had nothing that went to be butchered. We basically essentially sold the goat herd and reinvested that in the cows. So from that perspective, we could say we probably came up a little bit ahead.
And we also milked the goats for 6 months of the year.
And we don't have excellent records.
We didn't keep track of what we consumed on milk and cheese and all that sort of stuff that we made. So
that number going out the door isn't really reflective of
what they brought in.
You can't even really say it's a worst case scenario because
it's going to get worse.
It's a transition. Well, the cost is going to get higher, but hopefully
and with the cows, we've got a full year before we have any benefit from the dairy of them, and another full year before you actually have meat products. So the cattle become something that is very far out long term because you've got to float those animals for a lot longer than we had to float the goats to start seeing some return on that. And I'm not talking monetary return, I'm talking product for us.
So for anybody who's sort of new to this channel, new to our sort of homesteading life in general, you're getting a little bit of a crash history lesson here as to where we started and where we're at. So now you've seen in 2019, we moved to this property. We brought the sheep with us. And since that time, we've scaled it up and we've done a lot to make it work here. So we're going to go next into sort of a breakdown of how things went in 2021. I guess the first thing is, how many sheep did we have in 2021? Keeping in mind that in the early part we had only the breeders, and then you have all the lambs that ensue. We had to come back and look at this actually. So we had talked about, I guess the problem with the sheep is it's not an all in or all out in 1 year, because as we said, some of them were butchered early, carry over from 2020, and then of course you have your lamb crop. So we basically through the year had 9 breeding ewes, 3 sort of not quite breeding aged ewes that we kept, and the 2 rams that we used, and then we ended up with 13 lambs from those 9 ewes. So,
and we had the 2 rams that we butchered. To start off with the grains, bee pulp, and hay, we spent in total $2,090.36, which actually isn't too bad. Then when it came to wormer, we did have we always worm all of our ewes right after lambing before they go to the new pasture. Everybody gets wormed. That's just how it works. And we also usually still worm our young sheep at weaning, just to make sure
as needed.
Yeah, as needed.
That's an as needed.
We're slowly improving on that, and that's something we are culling and selecting for. But it's a long process to get there. So as much
it doesn't happen quickly.
No. So we had $101.63 spent on wormer, $60.94 spent on mineral, which is not really avoidable, really. You are spending to make sure that they have the things that they need.
That's stuff that you can't really, for the most part, produce yourself.
Exactly. And then we had $75.70 spent on shavings. Now, this year, for 2022, we haven't kept them in the barn like we did the previous year. So we have a lot less shavings expense this year, but in total, we had $2,328.63. plus a butcher fee of $174.02. So,
because we only sent the one.
Yeah, we only sent the one big boy. We did all the young ones ourselves last year,
Which really isn't that bad.
yeah, made
Now-
a significant savings, that's for sure. We actually did do our butchering in April. So we actually fed them for a bit longer than what we did in 2022, because this year we've butchered them all in February. So got a little more on the ball there, but that's a digression.
We had quite a few sheep, so that entire feed
We have
cost,
no idea how many sheep we had.
Well,
it's kind of like chicken math. I don't know, there's sheep. We don't know how many
the entire
there are.
feed cost for that many sheep, when you start looking at it that way, is really not that bad.
At peak, I'm going to say it this way. At peak time, we had 24 sheep. Some were lambs, some were 1-year-old ewes that we'd kept, some were breeding flock. But at the peak of last year, 2021, the most sheep we had on the property at one time was 24 sheep. That is our highest number. The lowest that we had at any given point was 15. So
In the spring,
Yeah.
after we had
and then we had some butchering, then we had more born, and then we had some selling, and but we're coming to
it's
that
a
part.
yearly cycle.
Exactly. So that $2,328.63 helped to cover the cost for up to 24 sheep at one time. Now, the one thing that I will say when we kind of filter through those numbers of sheep, it makes absolutely no sense, I know. But included in this, we fluctuated to the 24 sheep, but then we did actually sell 7 lambs this year. So between butchering some, selling 7, we're going into 2022 with, dramatic pause, how many have we got? So we're going in with 20. We've increased our flock up to 20. We've got 12 breeding ewes. We've got 4, technically we used 5 breeding rams, and we have 3 ewes that we're carrying over to potentially bump out some older ones this year. So we started out 2021 with 15 sheep, breeding, as well as 1-year-olds that were either for butcher or for growing our flock. Then we increased up to 24 sheep after the lambs were born. And then we had some live sales of 7, which brought us down. Then we purchased 2 older rams as well. So that brings us out to going into 2022 with 22. For those live sales, we brought in $1,400, which is nice. It's not definitely something you can count on every year. We had a great year for live sales. We had a great, we had equal number. We had the same ewe lambs as ram lambs, so it worked out perfect. Where some years we've had a lot of ram, and that they're, so it ended up being very beneficial to have them have the registered stock and be able to sell them.
On top of that sort of live sales, we basically processed or butchered 170 pounds worth of lamb / sheep meat in 2021.
And again, that's done the same way we said with the chickens and whatnot, as some of it was deboned, some of it went into, it's just what went in the freezer. So it's not based on a hanging weight or anything. It was just what we actually processed and put into the freezer.
So that works out to roughly $13.70 a pound.
Yeah, that's without the live sales factored in. So that includes butcher fees, all the minerals, all the feed, all that sort of stuff. We were at $13.70 a pound, which is a little bit high. We know there's ways to improve that, but all in all, for homegrown grass-fed lamb, not bad, not a bad number. Once we factored in the $1,400 in live sales and took that off, we were looking at $5.46 a pound.
Which kind of shows when things are sort of unique, you do have that ability to potentially help cover some of their costs by basically selling breeding stock to other people who may want to get started. All in all, I think the sheep are pretty simple in a way because they're not that expensive.
No.
For what they are. You can have an entire sort of population of them with diverse genetics, etc., and they still not break you. If you have land. That also factors back into what we were saying at the beginning about our feed cost could hypothetically be less. Probably a fair bit less if we can get our pastures up and running as well as we'd like to. And we should see improvement year after year with that. So the one I guess, negative in a way with sheep, if for anybody who's thinking they may want to start with it, you won't see, and again, this is not your value added, not, the fact that it's homegrown meat, and realistically that is priceless because you have food produced. But those cold hard numbers, if you start a sheep flock, you may not see the real return on that for a few years. It could be up to 5 years. Mm-hmm. But once you get to that point, if you've got a 10-year or longer sort of vision or goal with it, you will see it. You won't see it right away.
For that $2,328, we basically produced 13 lambs. So we have our breeding flock, even if you weren't going to grow your breeding flock or anything. Those 13 lambs, let's say at an average of 35 to 40 pounds hanging weight at a butcher, mm-hmm. You are bringing in anywhere from 450 to 500 pounds of meat from those 13. You basically, for $2,328, have enough meat to supply a family of 4. Which we often, that's where we kind of sit with the sheep. It's just, for us, it is a no-brainer, because if it was all we had, we could still make it work. So 2021 was the year we decided to get rid of the cows. Yes, you heard that right. We didn't even have the cows for one whole year. And here's our reason why.
Spoiler alert, most of this is a loss.
Exactly. Anybody that follows our channel does know the story behind this. We no longer have the cows. We no longer have the pigs, but it still is in our what it costs to run the homestead for 2021.
The cow endeavor started in 2020.
Yes, we got our 2 cows in November of 2020. 2020.
And then, of course, that spills over. Now, kind of spoiler alert for those who haven't been following us, the cows that we had never produced anything. They came as heifers and left as heifers. However,
they did give us a whole learning experience.
Yes, and
learning is priceless.
So we're going to break that down, because they left in August.
Yeah, yep. It was almost the end of August.
So we didn't even have them here on the farm for a full year. And what was the cost for the cows?
Well, again, grains, beet pulp, hay, and shavings, because they were kept in the barn. We did run them back every night for the most part. Anyways, they were $1,867.63 for 2 cows. We actually 2 heifers. We actually did have 3. We had a young Jersey calf, Daisy. Daisy never got factored into this because she had calf starter, and then we started her on her calf replacement. But we basically ended up selling Daisy right after she was weaned and
when
on
we
our
made
calf
the decision
starter.
that cows weren't for us. So I think the big thing with the cows was, at face value, that doesn't sound like much. However, there are other costs that we didn't even get to for things like equipment, and they were still heifers.
Yeah, there was no extra feed going into them because they were milking, or because they were in calf, or feeding a young calf. There wasn't any of that yet.
And we hadn't got to logistics of doing AI, which for the breed we had wasn't an option. But even to outcross them, or having a bull, or renting a bull, or this doesn't include any of that. So the reason the cows went was the price is pretty high, because that's not even a full year. I guess we could see the writing on the wall in the current unstable, I'm going to say volatile environment that is the 2020s, which is everything that's going on. It was kind of like, this is not a good time
for us to be running in a negative for what it was.
And we did some figuring. We're not even going to get into that right now. We're just going to leave it at this. But we did some extrapolating based on some of those figures, and looking out and factoring other costs of, like I say, purchasing, getting them bred, having extra animals.
Well, and you still got butcher fees on top of that. You've got all that sort of stuff.
And it became economically unfeasible.
For example, for the 2 cows for the year, we spent $1,107 on hay. And that could have been lessened in expense by maybe doing round bales, but at the same time, the machinery that we would had to have and keep running in order to do the round bales wasn't feasible either. It was just expense upon expense that just kind of It works for some people, and that's great.
It just wasn't going to work for our situation.
Exactly.
Trying to build this up from scratch.
Unless that was your main focus and all you were going to do, it really didn't make sense for us to do it on a small scale. You either had to go, I'm going to say whole hog, whole cow. You had to go all in, or it just didn't seem feasible to limp along.
And on 38 acres, we also asked ourselves the question, even if you could produce X amount of gallons of milk, and you could sell beef and this, that, whenever, was it really going to balance out in the end? And we just kind of said, for a few other reasons, no. So Stephanie mentioned in 2022 and 2023, we didn't really keep track or document, that's a better way to put it, as well as we did in the 2 previous years. And as I said before, we got into sort of the numbers and dollars and cents and all those figuring. Really, it was because it's a little boring to people and not everybody likes this kind of content. But we figured by the end of 2024, it'll be 5 years at this property and sort of the economics of raising sheep here. And we figured this was a good time to sort of go back and look at those other videos and just sort of draw out in a 5-year plan sort of where we started and where we are now.
So really, for the 2020 and the 2021 year, we kept great records. We knew exactly what we'd fed, exactly what we'd bedded down, everything, right to the letter, and it was amazing. But we did kind of let that slip. We have some rough ideas for 2022, absolutely nothing for 2023, and now we're coming into 2024. So for the 2024 year, the maximum number of sheep we've had on the property is 23. Now, as we've talked previously, in other years, that fluctuates and ebbs and flows with things going to the butcher, babies being born, and so on. But 2023 was the magic number so far this year. And as you know, the year's not over yet, so obviously this calculation doesn't account for all the food that the sheep are going to eat for the season. But where we're sitting right now, with butcher fees included, I will say, is $4,525.90. Now that seems, even to myself, like a crazy high number. But we do feel there's been fluctuations in costs, whether it's at the butcher, the hay, so many things since 2020, when we first started this kind of enterprise here at the new property, that it is balancing out. And we are finding that so far the cost per pound really is staying pretty level, which is kind of nice. So we're sitting at $12.10 a pound because we've already sent all the livestock to the butcher for the 2024 season that are going to go, and we have brought in 375 pounds of meat for our own consumption for this season. So that's not too bad, but that was at a fee of $1,303.90. So definitely a steep bit to get that meat processed, but it does allow us some other options moving forward if we decide to take them.
So this breakdown for this year, 2024, is, I'm going to say it, pretty basic, right? We've looked at what has gone out, and we've looked at what we've produced in value for meat, which is probably what most people are going to do. However, with sheep, there are a lot of ways to add value. And I think that's super important because in 2024, we've had no live sales, but by keeping a registered flock, the value of each individual sheep is a little higher. And you have the potential, though not every year, to sell to others who may want to start a flock. This year, we haven't factored in anything to do with milking. And as you've seen on some of our recent videos, and there'll be a few more that talk about it, this was the first year we actually got organized and milked the sheep. And unfortunately, we didn't keep records of how much volume of milk we got from them. And I'm going to say that totally would have factored into sort of the productivity of the flock. The third item that I'm going to mention is we do keep Icelandic sheep. They are a wool breed. The wool is really nice, and we've never really been able to nail down a dollar value to it. We could probably do some exercises, but it's one of those things where we haven't transformed it into the finished product and sort of added the value, but it's still always been contributing to that sort of overall value. So those are 3 other things to consider, aside from just meat, pounds of meat produced, that we haven't really factored in here. Another thing that I think didn't really come out in the wash in this video as well as we would like it to was that price per pound, because over the course of these years, we've continued to fence more of the property, get better at pasture rotation, all those kind of things. And I think even though it's sort of subtle, the fact that we've kind of maintained that same rough price per pound is a bit telling, because it is starting to work. And this goes back to what I said at the beginning of the video. It can be a really long-term process to really see the maximum benefit. But even in the short term, I hope that this video has been informative, and you can see that if you don't have a lot of property and you want to raise something for your family that is a little less dependent on outside inputs, sheep are a very viable option. Hopefully most of this video has been pretty positive, but if you've made it to this part in the video, I think you're going to notice there is one sort of elephant in the room, which is the parasite issue. Parasites in sheep is a huge issue. We deal with it every year. We've dealt with it at our old property, and we deal with it here. And that's part of why we included the cow discussion, because frankly, from the data that we've collected and what we've seen in our area, the sheep, if you're just looking at price per pound and sort of that simple benefit, I think work out better and are a little more forgiving for mistakes and errors than the cows are. However, we are sort of at that point in our life and in our life raising sheep where we have to make a bit of a decision that either we are going to continue to have to use various worm control methods, such as the medications. We could switch sheep, but I don't know if that actually will, at our scale, help us as well as we'd like, because parasite resistance is something you can breed for, but it's a slow process, and don't kid yourself on understanding that. It's going to take some time, and we're getting there, but it's not perfect. So the other option that we have toyed around with, and anybody who's followed hickory crop for a while has sort of seen some of our experiments, is a non-related grazing animal. And to date, all of our attempts outside of large horses or cows have essentially failed at actually achieving the task. So this is something we may revisit in the future. We'll see, and it's definitely something to consider, that even with rotational grazing, that multi-species grazing model probably is going to give you the maximum benefit if you're really focusing on raising sheep.
But every year we come back to the same conclusion. The sheep really are the cornerstone of our homestead. They are invaluable to us. They provide everything that we could need, especially this year with the milking, which I'm super excited about. Hi, Wally. This may have been a bit of a boring video with numbers, but really, sheep are, for us, that animal that could truly be sustainable on the homestead. And that is what we really enjoy about that. That is why we made the switch to basically keeping them grass-fed. You saw at the beginning of the video there, we were feeding them beet pulp and grains and all those things. And we've made the switch. And you know what? It's been amazing. I think in the long run, it's going to save us so much money, and we'll have healthier animals in the long run. Hello, you cutie. So definitely make sure you keep following along with Life Raising Sheep, because we've got lots of great content and definitely lots of great experiences to share.